The black SUV didn't slow down. It hit the glass doors of Redwood Memorial Hospital at 40 miles an hour, and the emergency room erupted, screaming, shattering, the wet crunch of metal on tile. 6 men came out with rifles before the dust settled. Patients dove under beds. Nurses froze. A doctor dropped his chart and put his hands in the air. One woman didn't move. Emily Carter stood at the central nursing station, 31 years old, still holding a patient clipboard, watching the men spread across the ER like they owned it. She counted them fast. 6 guns. 2 exits compromised. 1 bleeding man being dragged through the wreckage. She set the clipboard down. Let's see how this goes. If this story already has you gripped, follow along to the end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The man they dragged in was bleeding from his left side, somewhere between the lower ribs and his hip. He was conscious, but barely, and every time one of the gunmen jostled him, his breathing hitched in a way that told Emily his lung might already be compromised. She clocked it in about 4 seconds. She'd seen that breathing pattern before, not in a hospital. In a field in eastern Afghanistan, on a man who'd stepped on a pressure plate and caught shrapnel across his torso. He'd lived, barely. The gang leader was easy to identify. Not the biggest man in the room, but the one everyone else kept looking at. He had close-cropped hair, a jaw like a cinder block, and a scar that ran from his left ear almost to his chin. He wore a dark jacket, no insignia, and he moved the way people move when they've been in enough violent situations that panic stopped being a useful response a long time ago. He was scanning the room, counting staff, counting exits. Emily was doing the same thing. "Nobody moves!" The shout came from one of the younger ones, maybe 22, 23, holding his rifle too tight, muzzle drifting. Nervous. That made him dangerous in a specific way. Unpredictable, not tactical. She filed it away. A woman near the triage desk started crying. One of the gunmen swung toward her, and a nurse, young, name tag reading Priya, grabbed the crying woman's arm and pulled her back, whispering something. Good instinct. Don't become a focal point. The leader walked to the center of the ER. He looked at the staff assembled. 6 nurses, 3 doctors, 2 orderlies, and whatever patients hadn't already been evacuated from the waiting area when the SUV hit. Maybe 15 people total. His eyes landed on Emily. She hadn't moved, hadn't put her hands up. She was standing behind the nursing station counter with her arms at her sides, and she was looking at him directly, which was apparently not what he expected because he stopped. "You?" he pointed. "What's your job here?" "Charge nurse." "You got a doctor who can handle a gunshot wound?" She looked past him at the man on the floor. He'd stopped moving. His lips had that particular gray tinge that came before someone checked out for good. "He's running out of time," she said. "Faster than you're running out of patience." The leader stared at her for a moment. Then he looked back at his man on the floor, then back at her. "Fix him." "Let the woman go." Emily nodded toward a patient in a wheelchair near the entrance. Elderly, oxygen tank, clearly not going anywhere fast, but clearly terrified. "She's not useful to you, and she's a liability if her vitals crash." Something shifted in the leader's expression. Not softness. More like recalibration. He was used to people begging or freezing. He wasn't sure what to do with someone who was negotiating. "Let her go," he said to one of his men, "and get her out." He pointed at the woman in the wheelchair. 2 seconds later, the woman was being wheeled toward a side corridor. Emily watched her go and then turned back to the wounded man without waiting for further instruction. She came around the counter and crouched beside him on the floor. Up close, it was worse. Exit wound on the left side, higher than she'd initially clocked. The bullet had moved through soft tissue, but nicked something on the way out. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse thready, rapid. She lifted his shirt and found the wound, applied pressure with both hands. "I need a trauma bay," she said. "I need IV access, saline, and I need it now." "You don't give orders here," one of the gunmen said. "I'm not giving you an order," Emily said without looking up. "I'm telling you what he needs to survive. Those are different things." They moved him to Trauma Bay 1. 2 gunmen stayed in the main ER with the hostages. 2 more took up positions at the hospital's front entrance and the stairwell door. The leader walked with Emily, keeping close enough that she could smell cigarettes and gun oil. The 5th man, the nervous young one, was sent to check the upper floors. That left one she hadn't fully placed yet. Older, maybe 50, quiet, watching everything. He stood near the supply corridor entrance and said nothing. He was the one she'd have to think about longest. Inside the trauma bay, she moved fast. IV access in the antecubital vein, saline wide open, started pulling equipment. The leader stood in the doorway watching her work. "You're not scared," he said. "I'm focused," she said. There's a difference. Most people, they see guns. They start shaking. Most people haven't seen what I've seen." She said it flat. No dramatics, just fact. And she didn't look at him when she said it, because she was threading a chest decompression needle, and that required her full attention. He went quiet. She worked for 11 minutes straight, stabilizing the man enough that he wasn't going to die in the next 30. It wasn't a clean fix. He needed surgery, a real OR, a surgical team, blood products. But she bought him time. She was good at buying people time. When she stepped back, the leader looked at his man, then at her. "You actually know what you're doing?" "Yes," she said. "Where'd you learn that?" She met his eyes for the first time since they'd moved to the trauma bay, somewhere a lot less comfortable than this. She asked for blood supplies from the basement storage. She said it matter-of-factly, made it sound like a logistical necessity, which it was, but it also got her exactly what she needed, a reason to leave this room with one escort instead of two. The leader sent the older quiet man with her. She'd half expected that. He was the one she'd want watching her if she were in charge of this operation. Send your best to shadow the wild card. It was a reasonable call. His name, she'd learn later, was Darrow. He didn't introduce himself. He walked behind her through the service corridor, rifle up, keeping 2 meters of distance, which was correct spacing, close enough to react, far enough to avoid a grab. He'd done this before. He was watching her feet, not her face, which meant he understood that hands and feet telegraph movement before the rest of the body does. She respected that. Didn't change what she was going to do. The basement supply room was cold and fluorescent lit, shelves of IV bags and blood product coolers running along 3 walls. She went to the cooler on the far wall, pulled it open, started checking units. O negative, type specific. She needed to look like she was working, and she was. She genuinely needed the blood. But she was also listening to where he was standing. Behind her, 3 feet. His breathing was measured. He wasn't going to be easy. She pulled 2 units of O-neg and turned toward the shelf beside her where the transport case sat. She reached for it, and her elbow caught the edge of a stainless steel instrument tray she'd positioned when they walked in, 2 feet to his left. It didn't fall. It tipped, caught, and she grabbed it, but his eyes went to it for half a second. That was enough. She dropped the blood units and moved, not toward him, sideways, inside his rifle's effective range before he could track. She got her left hand on the barrel and drove it up and away, heard the trigger click as his finger reflexed, but the barrel was already pointed at the ceiling. And then she stepped through, took his balance with her hip, and brought him down onto the concrete floor with her forearm across his throat. He fought. He was strong and he knew how to fight, and he got a hand into her hair and pulled, which hurt, and she let herself feel that for exactly the half second it took her to adjust her angle and put enough pressure on his carotid that he went under. 22 seconds from start to finish. She sat back on her heels, breathing through her nose, and looked at him, unconscious. She checked his pulse, strong, and zip-tied his wrists with the restraint she'd pocketed from the supply rack on their way in. She pulled his radio off his vest, checked his sidearm. Glock 19, full magazine. She stood up. She hadn't had a weapon in 6 years. The weight of it felt exactly like she remembered, which she didn't know how to feel about. She clipped the radio to her waistband, tucked the Glock at the small of her back, and picked up the 2 units of O-neg blood off the floor. She had 4 gunmen left. 1 leader. A hospital full of people who needed her to be very precise about what happened next. She thought about the nervous young one upstairs. She thought about the layout of the 2nd floor. She'd done the overnight rotation up there for 3 months last year. She knew every room, every stairwell, every place a person could move without being seen from the corridor. She also thought about Marcus Webb, the night security supervisor who kept a panic button under the desk at the ground floor security station and who, if he was still alive and conscious, had probably already hit it or was waiting for his moment. She needed to know which it was before she did anything else. She moved back toward the stairwell and started climbing. Fairhaven, Oregon wasn't a big city, population under 60,000, the kind of place where you knew your neighbor's car and the same faces showed up at the farmer's market every Saturday. Redwood Memorial was the only full-service hospital within 40 miles. It had 212 beds, a Level 3 trauma center designation, and on a Thursday night at 11:40 p.m., it had exactly the kind of skeleton crew that made it vulnerable. Emily had been the charge nurse for the ER for 2 years. Before that, she'd been a floor nurse for 3. Before that, she'd been other things. She didn't talk about the other things. Not at work, not at the bar on Clement Street where the hospital staff went after long shifts, not anywhere. She'd come to Fairhaven because it was quiet and because the pace of an ER, the controlled chaos of it, the problem solving, the moments where everything narrowed down to one critical decision. Scratched something she needed scratched without requiring her to carry a weapon. She had gotten good at being a nurse. She was genuinely good at it. But she had not, in the 6 years since she'd left the service, forgotten a single thing she'd learned before. The second floor was dark when she pushed through the stairwell door. The overnight halls had only about 40% of the overhead lights running to save power. Standard practice, nothing emergency about it, which meant the darkness was normal. She moved along the left wall, keeping her footfalls on the rubberized floor runner that deadened sound. She found the young gunman in the hallway outside room 214. He was standing with his back to the window, rifle hanging loose at his side, scrolling his phone with his free hand. Not paying attention. Nervous earlier, now bored, which was its own kind of dangerous. Bored people startled. She stood in the shadow outside the pool of hall light and thought about this for about 3 seconds. She needed him down without noise, without alerting the ER. The stairwell doors were heavy and would muffle most sound, but a shot would carry, and she wasn't going to do that anyway. She didn't shoot unconscious threats, and she wasn't going to shoot this kid unless he made her. She wasn't sure he was even old enough to have fully understood what he'd gotten himself into tonight. That wasn't her problem right now, but she noted it. She moved along the wall toward him, used a supply cart she'd spotted in the alcove to her right as a distraction, tipped it just enough to make one wheel squeak. His head came up. He turned toward the sound. She came up behind him fast from his left, took his rifle with her right hand, and drove the heel of her left palm into the base of his skull in a precise, controlled strike. Not full force. Enough. He went down and she caught him before he hit the floor. She checked him, breathing fine. He was going to wake up with a headache that would last 3 days, but he was going to wake up. She zip-tied his hands, pulled him into the alcove behind the supply cart, and took his radio. 2 radios now. She kept one off, tucked the other, Darrow's, in her ear. She needed to get to the security desk. Marcus Webb was 53 years old and had worked security at Redwood Memorial for 11 years. He dealt with drunks, psych patients, one extremely memorable incident involving a man who'd tried to leave with a defibrillator under his coat, and 1,000 smaller crises that never made the incident report. He'd never dealt with this. He was under his desk, not hiding. The desk was bolted to the floor and concrete-backed, and he'd wedged himself into the footwell because he'd hit the silent alarm 12 minutes ago, and he was keeping his head down while he waited to see whether it had gone through. The panel hadn't confirmed. There'd been no indicator light. He had no idea if anyone was coming. He heard the door. He pressed himself further back into the footwell, one hand on the small baton he kept on his belt, even though he had no illusions about what that baton would do against a rifle. Marcus. It was a voice he knew, low, direct, female. He came up enough to see over the desk edge. Emily Carter was crouched in the doorway, dressed in her scrubs, holding a rifle she clearly knew how to hold. He stared at her for a moment. "The alarm," he said. "Did it go through?" "I don't know yet." "Did you hit it?" 12 minutes ago, maybe 13. "Okay." She moved to the desk, came around behind it, looked at the panel. It went through. The indicator's off because the connection at this end got disrupted when the SUV hit. The line runs under the entrance foyer, but the alarm itself transmitted before the break. "How do you know that?" "I don't, for certain. But the alternative is that we've been sitting here for 13 minutes with no help coming, and if that's true, then I need to change my approach, so I'm choosing to believe the alarm went through until proven otherwise." She looked at him. "Can you move?" "Yeah." "Good. I need you in the basement, room B4, There's a man restrained on the floor. Stay with him. He's unconscious. If he starts seizing or his breathing changes, hit the emergency call button on the wall. Don't untie him. Don't let him convince you to. Emily, Marcus looked at the rifle in her hands, then at her face. What's happening right now? She almost smiled. I'm handling it. In the ER, 2 gunmen held the remaining hostages clustered near the central nursing station. 8 nurses and doctors, 3 patients who couldn't be moved, 1 orderly. The leader was in Trauma Bay 1 with his wounded man. Priya Vasanthan, the nurse who'd grabbed the crying woman earlier, had been keeping her head down, watching the 2 gunmen and quietly noting things. She didn't know why she was noting them. It wasn't like she was going to do anything with the information. She was a nurse, not a soldier. She'd been a nurse for 2 years. She was 26 years old, and she was trying not to have a panic attack, while also trying not to let anyone see that she was trying not to have a panic attack. One of the 2 gunmen was pacing. He kept checking his radio. He'd tried twice to raise the man Emily had taken down in the basement, and twice gotten nothing. She could see him getting antsy. The second gunman, bigger, calmer, stood against the far wall. He was scanning the group, the doors, the ceiling. Professional. Priya didn't like him. Her phone was in her pocket. She'd silenced it when all this started. She didn't know if she could text without them seeing. She was working up the nerve to try when the lights went out. Not all of them. The main overheads went dark and the emergency lighting clicked on. A dim red-orange glow from the strip lights along the floor and the exit signs above the doors. The trauma bays had their own power, so she could see a wedge of white light from Bay 1's doorway. But the rest of the ER went red and shadow. Both gunmen swung up their rifles. The pacing one shouted, "What the hell?" A voice came over the radio at his belt, low, unhurried. "Report in." He grabbed the radio. "We're good here. What happened to the lights?" Silence. Then the same voice, same tone. "They're done." He stared at the radio. The bigger gunman turned his head slowly, scanning the shadows where the hallways fed into the ER. He'd been in enough bad situations to recognize when something had gone very, very wrong. "Braille," he said quietly to the pacing one. "Lock down the hostages, now." But Braille wasn't listening. Braille was backing toward the wall, rifle up, pointing it at nothing, at the darkness. "Who's there?" he shouted. "Show yourself!" No one answered. In the red-lit ER, with the shadows stretching long, and the hostages pressed together near the desk, for the first time since the SUV had hit the doors, the 2 gunmen looked like something other than the people in control. They looked like hunted men. And somewhere in the dark corridors of Redwood Memorial Hospital, Emily Carter was already moving. She moved through the red-lit corridor like she already knew how this was going to end. That wasn't confidence. It was discipline. There was a difference, and Emily had learned it the hard way. In places that didn't appear on any civilian map, in moments that didn't appear in any after-action report she'd been allowed to read. Confidence was fragile. Discipline held even when things fell apart, which they always did, because nothing in a hostile environment ever moved the way you planned it. The ER entrance corridor was 30 feet long and made a slight dogleg to the right before opening into the main floor. She'd walked it so many times over the past 2 years that she could have done it blind, which was nearly what she was doing now. The emergency strips along the floor gave off just enough light to navigate by, red-orange and low, casting shadows upward instead of down, making everything look slightly wrong. She stayed close to the left wall, moving heel to toe, weight-controlled, the Glock in her right hand with her finger indexed along the frame. She was not calm. That was important to be honest about, even if only to herself. Her heart rate was elevated, and her hands were not perfectly steady. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded a lot like her old team sergeant was saying, "Situational awareness. Carter, where are your exits? Where are your threats? Stop thinking about your hands." So she stopped thinking about her hands and started counting. 2 gunmen in the main ER. 1 leader in Trauma Bay 1. 2 down, 2 secured. 1 more somewhere she hadn't placed yet. She'd counted 6 when they'd come through the entrance, and she only had confirmed positions for 5. That 6th man was the problem. She stopped at the dogleg corner and listened. From the main ER, she could hear Braille shouting at the dark, which was useful in that it told her exactly where he was, but also told her that the situation in there was deteriorating fast. Scared people with guns did one of two things. They shut down or they escalated. Brell had the voice of someone heading toward escalation. The bigger one, the professional. That was different. She'd heard him say lock down the hostages in the clipped, measured tone of someone who'd been trained to manage panic. He was the one she needed to move on before Braille did something that couldn't be undone. She came around the corner fast and low. The bigger gunman, she'd find out later his name was Kellor, was positioned between the hostages and the main corridor, exactly where she'd have put someone if she were running this. He had his back 3/4 to the wall, and his sight line covered the hallway and the desk both. He was good. He was also looking at the wrong corridor. She came from the supply wing entrance on his left. He heard her. She was sure of that, because he started to turn. But the distance was already closed, and she put her shoulder into him hard, drove his weapon arm up with her left forearm, and took him down sideways into the medication cart along the wall. The cart went over. Glass broke. Something metal clattered across the tile, and someone in the hostage group screamed. He was stronger than her, and he recovered faster than she expected. He got a hand on her throat, not a choke, a push, and shoved her back 2 steps, then swung his rifle around. She was already inside the arc, barrel pointed past her, and she drove the butt of the Glock into his forearm twice in fast succession, felt something give on the second hit, and he dropped the rifle. He didn't go down. He threw a right hand that clipped her above the ear, and her vision stuttered for a half second, white at the edges, and she felt that all the way to her back teeth. She backed up 2 steps. He came forward. She let him. When he reached for her, she slipped the grab, stepped left, and put her elbow into the side of his neck with everything she had. It wasn't a clean hit. She'd been aiming for the carotid sinus, the pressure point that shuts things down fast. But she was still vibrating from the shot above her ear, and she hit half an inch wrong. He staggered, but stayed up. "Down," she said. "You're a nurse," he said, like that was going to change her answer. She hit him again, same spot, cleaner this time. He dropped. She stood over him for a moment, breathing harder than she wanted to, and pressed 2 fingers to her temple where he'd hit her, already swelling. She was going to feel that for a week. Braille had gone completely silent. She looked up. He was backed against the nursing station, rifle pointed at her, but the barrel was shaking and his face had gone a particular shade of pale that she recognized. Not rage, not resolve. He was at the edge of something, and the thing he was at the edge of was either surrender or a very bad decision. "Put it down," she said. "Who the hell are you?" "I work here." She kept the Glock at her side, not raised, not threatening, just present. "I've worked here for 5 years. I know where everything in this building is, and I know everyone in it. And right now I know your partner in the trauma bay needs a surgical team in the next 4 hours, or he's not going to make it. And none of that is going to happen if you don't put the rifle down. You took out Keller. You took out..." He was doing the math in his head. She could see it, counting the radios that hadn't answered. "You took out all of them?" "The ones I found." "How?" "Braille." She took 1 slow step toward him. "Put the rifle down." He didn't, but his hand steadied a little, which was actually worse in some ways. A steadied hand meant a decision was forming. She watched his trigger finger. "There's a way out of this that doesn't end with you in federal lockup for the next 20 years, she said, "but it requires you to put that down in the next 10 seconds. She was lying. There was no such way. But she needed him moving toward her rather than toward the hostages, and the lie bought her 3 seconds while he processed it. He lowered the rifle. Not all the way. To his hip, muzzle down. She crossed the remaining distance in 2 steps, took the rifle out of his hands with a motion so practiced it barely registered as violence, and zip-tied his wrist to the desk drawer handle with the restraint she'd already had in her left hand for the last 30 seconds. Then she leaned against the desk and breathed. "Emily," Priya's voice from the cluster of staff near the back wall. "Emily, are you..." "I'm fine." She wasn't entirely fine. The side of her head was throbbing, and her left knee had hit the floor when Kellor took her down, and she hadn't noticed until just now. She pushed off the desk and turned to face the group. "Is anyone hurt? Anyone injured in the initial crash?" 3 hands went up. "Minor stuff. From the sound of it, cuts from the glass, one nurse who'd twisted her ankle diving for cover. Nothing critical." "Okay." She looked at Priya. "I need you to get everyone who can move into the break room. There's still at least one person I haven't accounted for. Don't open that door for anyone but me. Priya nodded. Her face was the color of old paper, but her jaw was set, and she was moving before Emily finished the sentence, hurting people, murmuring to them, keeping it together. Emily watched for half a second. Good nurse, she thought. Then she turned toward the corridor. The sixth man. She needed to find him. She found him finding her first. He came through the stairwell door at the far end of the main corridor while she was still 30 feet away, and he must have seen Keller on the floor because he opened fire immediately. No warning, no hesitation, just 3 fast shots that hit the wall 2 feet to her left and sent her diving behind the radiology intake cart. She went down hard on her right shoulder, the one she'd partially dislocated 2 years ago falling off a hiking trail outside Fairhaven and which had never properly recovered, and the impact sent a white-hot jolt all the way to her collarbone that made her gasp through her teeth. Okay. That was new information. She filed it. The shooting stopped. He was either out of his sight line or he was repositioning, and she didn't know which, and she couldn't look without exposing her head. She listened. Footsteps. Moving left, toward the trauma bays. He was trying to flank her. She rolled right, away from the cart, came up in a crouch, and moved fast toward the nearest doorway. A linen storage room, door already open. She pushed through, got behind the doorframe, and brought the Glock up. He came into view in the corridor, moving fast, sweeping his rifle. He was the last one she hadn't ID'd. Young, maybe late 20s, built solid, moving with the jerky, over-controlled precision of someone who'd had some training but not enough. He checked the area around the cart, found it empty, and stopped. His head turned toward the linen room. She didn't move. Doorframe, shadows. If she stayed still, he fired anyway. 2 shots into the doorframe, high, wood splintering above her head, and she felt one of them clip her left sleeve, close enough that the displaced air was warm. Too close. She returned fire. 1 shot, aimed low at his legs because she needed him down, not dead, and it hit. She heard him go down cursing, loudly, a sustained string of profanity that actually helped her track his position. She came out of the doorway and covered the distance while he was still reacting to the pain, and she got his weapon out of his hands and his hands zip-tied before he'd fully processed what was happening. He looked up at her, jaw clenched, hand pressed to his thigh. "You shot me," he said, like this was a surprise. "You shot at me first," she said, "through a wall." She looked at the wound. Upper thigh, lateral, bleeding, but not arterial. He'd be fine until the paramedics got there. She pulled a compression bandage from her cargo pocket. She'd grabbed it from the basement supply room, because she was still a nurse, and applied it to the wound with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this in places where the nearest hospital was a 4-hour helicopter ride. He stared at her. "Why are you—" "Because I'm a nurse," she said. "Hold that in place." He held it. She stood up. Her shoulder was bad. Not broken bad, but bad enough that her arm wasn't fully cooperative, and she was running a mental inventory of everything that hurt and trying to prioritize it, which was a skill she'd developed not in nursing school, but before, in a desert where prioritizing what hurt was the difference between getting the mission done and not. 6 gunmen, 5 down, 1 left. The leader. The trauma bay had gone quiet. That was either good or very bad, and she didn't know which, and she moved toward it with the Glock up and her bad shoulder protesting every step. She stopped outside Bay 1. The door was mostly closed, not latched, just pulled to, the edge not flush with the frame. She could see a slice of the interior through the gap. The overhead lights were still on in there, white and clinical, powered by the bay's independent circuit. She could see the wounded man on the gurney, still breathing, chest rising and falling, slow but regular. The IV she'd set was still running. She couldn't see the leader. She listened, heard him before she saw him. A slight shift, the sound of weight settling, and she updated his position to the left side of the door, out of the view slice, pressed against the wall. He knew she was out here. "I have a hostage," he said through the door. She didn't answer. "The doctor who was in here when you cut the lights. I have her." Emily processed that. She'd put 3 doctors in the break room. No, 2 doctors. Dr. Amara Nkosi from the trauma team and Dr. Russell from overnight internal medicine. The third, Dr. Fenn, she hadn't specifically placed, hadn't verified. She'd assumed. She shouldn't have assumed. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them. Is she injured? She asked. Not yet. Then what do you want? I want to walk out of here. A pause. I want my man on that gurney to get to a real surgical team, and I want a car. The police are already outside. She wasn't certain of this, but she'd transmitted the alarm status to Marcus, and the alarm had gone through 17 minutes ago now. You saw the kind of people Fairhaven has outside. You're not going to outrun them. Let me worry about that. She shifted her weight, trying to see more through the door gap. She caught a sliver of the left wall in the edge of the trauma bay cabinet, but nothing that told her where exactly he was relative to Dr. Fenn. I want to talk to her, Emily said. Why? Because I need to know she's okay before we talk about what you want. A pause. Then, go ahead. A woman's voice, tight, controlled. I'm all right. Dr. Fenn. Emily had only worked with her a handful of times. She was newer, maybe a year on staff. Came from a hospital in Portland. He hasn't hurt me. Dr. Fenn, Emily said. Are you standing or sitting? Standing. Facing which direction? A moment's hesitation. The door. That was what she needed. Fenn was between the leader and the door, which put the leader. Don't answer her questions, he said. But he said it a half-second too late, and the slight echo in his voice told her he was in the right rear corner of the trauma bay, about 12 feet from the door. Emily made a decision. She wasn't entirely happy about the decision, but she made it. She pushed through the door, fast and low, and she went left, away from the door, away from the trajectory anyone in the right corner would expect. And she saw him clearly for the first time since the chaos of the initial takeover. He had a gun to Dr. Fenn's head, his left arm across her chest, and for a half-second he was looking at the doorway where Emily wasn't instead of where she was. She raised the Glock. Let her go. He turned, adjusted. Now they were looking at each other directly across the trauma bay, and she had a clear shot at him if not for the 3 inches of Dr. Fenn's head between them. You shot Reeves, he said. It took her a moment to realize he meant the man in the corridor. You shot him in the leg. He's alive, she said, like your man on the gurney. Everyone who's breathing right now is breathing because I made choices. Don't make me change my approach. Something flickered across his face. You were military. She didn't answer. Not just military. The way you moved through this building, I had 4 men with weapons, and you... He stopped. Special operations? Does it matter? It matters to me. He hadn't loosened his grip on Dr. Fenn, but he hadn't moved his weapon either. They were in a standoff, and both of them knew it. Who are you? Emily Carter, charge nurse, Redwood Memorial. Former staff sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to SOCOM medical support. She held the Glock very steady. And I'm asking you to let her go. The 75th Ranger Regiment. She hadn't said those words out loud to anyone in Fairhaven. Not once. She'd stored them somewhere deep and quiet, and she'd built a life over the top of them, a careful, regular, this is who I am now life. And she hadn't expected to pull them back out in a trauma bay at midnight. But here they were, hanging in the air between her and a man who was recalculating every assumption he'd made about this night. You ran this entire building, he said, by yourself. I know the building, she said. Let her go. The silence stretched out for several seconds. Doctor. Fenn's breathing was audible, rapid, shallow, the controlled panic of someone who understood medicine well enough to be monitoring her own physiological response to fear and hating everything about what it was telling her. Emily caught her eye over the leader's arm. She tried to put something steady into her expression. Stay still. Let it play out. Fenn's chin dipped, barely. She understood. My man, the leader said finally, on the gurney. You said 4 hours. If he goes to OR, yes. You stabilized him. I did. You didn't have to. He needed it, she said. Same as you'd have stitched up someone on the opposite side if they were bleeding out in front of you. Some things aren't strategic. That landed somewhere. She could see it. The math of the situation had shifted completely, and he was working through it in real time. How many men down, police outside, A woman with a gun who'd moved through his entire operation like it wasn't an obstacle. The window for any outcome but surrender had been closed for 10 minutes. She thought maybe he was starting to understand that. "If I put it down," he said, "what happens to him? My man. He gets a surgical team. And me. You get whatever the DA decides." She didn't soften it. He wouldn't have respected the softened version. "But you get to walk out of this room on your own feet, which is more than you were giving everyone else here tonight." Another pause. Longer this time. Then he lowered the gun. Dr. Fenn moved fast, out from under his arm, 2 steps toward the wall, putting distance between them, and Emily tracked the movement with her peripheral vision without dropping her sightline. Fenn reached the wall and pressed her back against it, and let out a breath so ragged it sounded like something tearing. The leader set the gun on the gurney beside his wounded man. He kept his eyes on Emily. "Hands behind your head," she said. He put his hands behind his head. Emily came forward, keeping the Glock up until she had the gun off the gurney and his wrists secured, and then she stepped back and looked at him. This man who'd driven a vehicle through a hospital entrance, who'd terrorized a room full of people, who'd organized whatever this operation was supposed to be before it went sideways on him completely. "What was the plan?" she asked. He looked at the wounded man on the gurney. "Protection money collection went wrong. Petrov, my man there, he got shot when the contact security opened up on us. I needed a place to take him." "So you drove through a hospital?" "I drove to a hospital," he said. "I just didn't think about the doors." She almost laughed. It wasn't funny. Nothing about this was funny. But there was something so absurdly practical about that statement that her body tried to process it as humor, and she had to work to stop it. "What's your name?" she asked. "Garrett Wild." "Garrett Wild." She said it evenly. "You're going to tell the police everything. The contact, the collection, the organization, all of it. You don't have any leverage left," she said. "You have a man who needs surgery. Cooperating is the only card you have." He looked at her for a long moment. "You a nurse or a lawyer?" he said. "Tonight, apparently, all kinds of things." She heard it then, through the walls, through the building, the sound that the part of her brain that never fully demilitarized had been waiting for since she'd sent Marcus to the basement. Rotors. Low and steady, coming from the south. A helicopter, big, moving fast. Then, from the entrance corridor, the unmistakable sound of boots. Organized, coordinated, not the shuffling of civilians. The crash of a tactical entry stack hitting the front of the building. "Fairhaven PD, clear the entrance!" She raised her voice so it would carry. "ER is clear. Charge nurse on scene. 1 suspect in custody in Trauma Bay 1. 5 additional suspects secured at various points. I'll send you locations." A pause. Then, through the corridor, "Copy that, Redwood Memorial. We are entering." She lowered the Glock and exhaled slowly. Her shoulder was on fire. The side of her head had swollen enough that she could feel it pulling at her temple. Her left knee wasn't right. She was aware of all of these things now in a way she hadn't been for the last... She checked the clock on the Trauma Bay wall. 41 minutes. 41 minutes since the SUV hit the doors. Dr. Fenn was still against the wall. She hadn't said anything since Emily had told her to stay still. "Ben." Emily looked at her. "Are you actually okay?" Ben opened her mouth, closed it, then, "I've been a trauma doctor for 6 years, and I've never been so scared in my life." "That's reasonable. How are you not—" She stopped. Emily didn't answer that question, because the answer was complicated and this wasn't the moment for it. She checked the wounded man on the gurney instead. Pulse, still holding, breathing still stable. He'd make it if they moved fast. The first tactical officer came through the Trauma Bay door, rifle up, moving in a textbook entry pattern. He stopped when he saw Emily, assessed the scene in about 2 seconds. Suspects secured, civilians present, no immediate threat, and lowered his weapon. He looked at Emily, looked at the secured Wild, looked at the Glock in her hand. "You the charge nurse?" he said. "Yes." "Are you the one who sent the secured suspect locations over the radio?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, then into his radio. "Control Tactical 1 is in Trauma Bay 1. Suspects are secured. I've got 1 civilian medical, He looked at her again, like he was trying to figure out what category she fell into. "I'll explain when we're out." Emily set the Glock on the counter. "Your crime scene," she said. "I need to check on my staff." She walked past him into the corridor. The hallway was filling with tactical officers now, moving efficiently through the building, following the locations she'd transmitted. She could hear them calling clear on the floors above, heard someone on the radio reporting 2 suspects secured in the basement, one in the second-floor alcove. Someone was going to have to explain how they'd gotten there. Priya came out of the break room before Emily got to it. The door opened, and there she was, standing in the red emergency glow with her lanyard twisted in her hands, and she stopped when she saw Emily coming down the corridor. "Is it over?" Priya asked. "It's over," Emily said. Priya's composure lasted about 2 more seconds. Then she made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and looked away. Emily watched her, didn't move toward her, just let her have it, because sometimes you needed 30 seconds of falling apart before you could function again. And she had given those 30 seconds to herself in places Priya would never see, so she understood what they cost. "The patients," Emily said when Priya had taken a breath. "Who do we still have in there?" Priya straightened up, came back. 3. Mrs. Albrecht with the hip, the teenager from the car accident, his arm, and the chest pain admit from 7 o'clock. He's been quiet. I've been checking. Walk me through them. They went back in, and Emily moved from patient to patient, checking vitals, reassessing, asking questions, doing the job. It was methodical and familiar, and it helped her, more than she wanted to admit, to just be a nurse again for 10 minutes while the tactical teams worked around them. It was Dr. Amaran Kosi who found her eventually, standing at the nursing station updating a chart by the light of her phone because the overhead lights were still on emergency only. "Emily?" And Kosi was the senior trauma physician, and she'd been calm throughout. She'd told Emily later that she'd decided the only useful thing she could do was stay useful, so she'd kept her people together in the break room and cataloged everyone's status and waited. "The police commander is asking for you. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. Emily." And Kosi said her name differently the second time. Not urgent, not demanding. Something else. She waited until Emily looked up from the chart. "What you did tonight?" "I did what I could with what I had," Emily said. "Same as always." And Kosi looked at her steadily. "Where did you learn to do that?" Emily finished the notation on the chart. "Different job," she said. "Long time ago." She picked up the chart and moved toward the police commander. But outside the building, she could hear it now clearly, not just the helicopter, but vehicles, organized voices, the specific procedural rumble of a large law enforcement response setting up a perimeter. Something was happening that she couldn't account for. It was bigger than a local PD response to a hospital alarm. Fairhaven's entire tactical unit was maybe 12 officers on a good night. What she was hearing sounded like 2 or 3 times that, plus aviation support. She stepped past 2 officers near the entrance corridor, pushed through the damaged door frame where the SUV had come through, and stopped. The parking lot was lit up. 4 Fairhaven PD vehicles plus 2 state police cruisers plus a black van with federal markings she couldn't quite read from here. The helicopter was on the grass median across the street, rotors still turning, and standing beside it were 4 people in tactical gear that wasn't local. One of them was looking at the building. Even from across the parking lot, in the aftermath dark with her head throbbing and her shoulder wrong, she could see the patch on his left arm. Not state, not federal standard issue. She knew that patch. She hadn't seen it in 6 years, but she knew it. Her stomach did something she hadn't expected. The figure with the patch turned and started walking toward the hospital entrance. He hadn't seen her yet. He was talking to someone on a radio, and he was moving with that particular economy of motion that people carried in their bodies long after they'd technically become civilians, if they'd ever really become civilians. He was 30 feet away when he looked up and stopped. He knew her too. She stood in the wrecked entrance of Redwood Memorial Hospital, in her scrubs, with blood, not hers mostly, drying on her forearms and a bruise forming over her left temple. And she looked at the man walking toward her across the parking lot, and for the first time in 41 minutes of the most controlled she'd ever been, she wasn't sure she could hold it together, because the man crossing the parking lot was Captain Dex Harlan, and Captain Dex Harlan was dead. She'd been at his funeral, Her brain did something strange. It split. One half was still running protocols: shoulder assessment, threat scan, civilian count, exits. The part of her that had been trained to keep functioning regardless of what was happening inside her skull. The other half was standing completely still, watching a dead man walk across a parking lot and not knowing what to do with that information at all. Dex Harlan had been 34 when he died, or when they'd told her he died. He'd look 38 now, maybe 40, and he'd grown a beard that he wouldn't have been allowed in service, and he was wearing civilian tactical clothes with no unit designation except that patch, which she now recognized because it was catching more light as he closed the distance. Not a standard unit patch. A task force emblem. Black background, no text. The kind of thing that didn't exist on any organizational chart a civilian could access. He stopped 6 feet from her. "Carter," he said. "You were dead," she said. "I know. I was at your funeral." "I know that too." She looked at him for a long moment. Her shoulder was screaming. The bruise over her temple had tightened the skin enough that she could feel her pulse in it. She had dried blood on her forearms, and her left knee was stiff, and she was standing in the wreckage of her hospital entrance, talking to a ghost. And the only response she could put together that wasn't either crying or hitting him was, "Why are you here?" "That's complicated," he said. "Dex." "The Wild crew," he said. "Garrett Wild and his organization. We've had them under federal surveillance for 14 months. Protection rackets, trafficking connections, 3 open homicide cases in 2 states. Tonight's operation, the collection that went wrong, it wasn't random. The contact they were collecting from was a CI, ours." He paused. "When the CI security opened up and Wild's crew ran, we lost the signal. We picked it back up here." She processed that in layers. "You were tracking them. All night. And when they drove through my hospital, we were 7 minutes out." Something moved behind his eyes. It wasn't quite guilt, but it was in that neighborhood. "By the time we set up the perimeter, you'd already—" He stopped, looked past her at the building, the secured suspects being walked out by tactical officers, the staff visible through the damaged entrance frame. "How many of your people are hurt?" "Minor injuries, 1 staff member with a sprained ankle, a few lacerations from the glass. The hostages are physically intact." She said it flat, clinical. "Wild's man in the trauma bay needs surgery, upper abdominal penetrating wound. I've got him stable, but that window is tightening." Harlan turned and said something into his radio. She caught surgical transport and expedite, and then he was looking at her again. "You took down 6 armed men," he said. "By yourself. In 40 minutes. 41. He almost smiled, almost. Still counting. "It's how I was trained." The almost smile faded. "I know. I trained you." She had nothing to say to that, so she said nothing, and the silence between them held the weight of 6 years and a funeral, and everything that word complicated was covering, and she let it sit there because she was too tired to do anything else with it. The next 2 hours moved in a particular rhythm that she recognized from operational aftermath. Controlled, procedural, exhausting in a low-grade way that hit harder once the adrenaline left than it ever did during the actual event. Paramedics came in and took over patient care, which she let happen while keeping one eye on everything because she couldn't fully stop. Wild's wounded man, Petrov, was loaded into an ambulance with a full trauma team escort headed for the OR at Meridian General, 40 miles east. The officers were walked out one by one. Statements were taken. Priya sat with Mrs. Albrecht and held her hand while the paramedics reassessed her hip. Emily noticed that and marked it. The Fairhaven PD commander, a heavy-set man named Dolan, who had the permanently tired face of someone who'd been managing a too-small department for too many years, pulled her aside near the triage desk at some point after midnight. "Ms. Carter," he started. "Sergeant Carter," Harlan said, from 2 feet behind him. Dolan turned, looked at Harlan's credentials, looked back at Emily. "You have a military record." "I did," she said, 6 years ago. "The use of force tonight was proportional and documented," Harlan said. "Federal task force will be taking point on the Wild investigation. Everything that happened inside this building tonight is part of that case record." Dolan looked between them. He was clearly deciding whether to push back, and equally clearly deciding not to. "We'll still need a full statement from Sergeant Carter." "You'll have it," she said. When Dolan moved off, she looked at Harlan. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Dolan's good police, but he's going to want to spend 3 hours on paperwork before he thinks about the tactical picture. You don't have 3 hours." "Why not?" He said it quietly, like he didn't want the words to go further than the two of them. "Because one of Wild's men is already talking." She waited. "Reeves, the one you shot in the leg. He started the moment a paramedic looked at his wound and told him the bullet nicked his femoral. He's been talking since, and what he's saying—" Harlan looked past her, toward the parking lot where his team was still processing. "Wild is mid-level. The organization above him has been watching this collection network for 2 years. Tonight was supposed to go clean. When it didn't, when Wild's crew ran to a hospital and everything went sideways. The people above him are going to want to know why." "What does that have to do with me?" "Because Reeves says you disarmed and secured 6 armed professionals in less than an hour, and he's describing what you did with enough tactical accuracy that anyone listening to that description is going to start asking who you are." He met her eyes. People above Wild don't like questions they can't answer. She felt the shape of what he was saying, and she didn't like it. "You think I'm a liability to them?" "I think you're a variable they didn't account for and can't explain." He said it carefully. "I think by tomorrow morning they're going to know your name." The quiet that had been Fairhaven, her Fairhaven, the farmer's market, and the bar on Clement Street, and the ER she'd walked into every shift for 5 years, shifted slightly in her perception. Not gone, just changed, the way a room changes when you learn something happened in it that you didn't know about. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I need you to be prepared. And because—" He stopped. Something in his expression that she hadn't seen from him before, which was saying something because she'd seen him in situations that stripped people down to the essential. "Because I owe you a lot more than a warning." She looked at him. "You've been alive for 6 years, Dex." "Yes." "And you didn't—" "I couldn't. It wasn't—" He stopped again. Whatever the sentence was, he couldn't finish it, and she didn't push because she could see it was costing him, and she was too tired for that conversation in a parking lot at 1 a.m. with her shoulder half wrecked. They would have that conversation, just not now. "What do you need from me?" she asked instead. "Statement, full tactical account of tonight, and then I need to put you in contact with the task force so that if anything—" His radio crackled. He turned away, listening. She watched his posture shift, the particular way his shoulders squared when information arrived that required immediate response. He turned back. His face had changed. "Reeves isn't the only one talking," he said. "One of the organization's people was in the area tonight, watching the collection. He made the hospital." "You mean he knows what building they came to?" "He knows what building, and he has Wild's radio frequency, and he's been listening since they set up inside." Harlan's voice was level, but she'd known him long enough to hear what was underneath it. He heard everything. The names. "Your name." The parking lot felt suddenly different, more open. She looked at the tree line along the far edge of the hospital property, dark, dense Douglas fir pushing against the chain link, maybe 80 meters out. She did it without thinking about it. The automatic scan for elevated positions and cover. The thing her body did that civilian life had never fully trained out. "He's still in the area?" she asked. "We don't know." "Then we need to move everyone inside." "We're already—" "Priya Vasanthan is in the entrance corridor with 2 paramedics and 3 patients on gurneys," Emily said. "She's in a direct sight line from the east tree line through that destroyed entrance frame. Move her now." Harlan had his radio up before she finished the sentence. She was already moving back toward the building. She came through the wrecked entrance fast, scanning, and found Priya exactly where she'd said, standing in the blown-out corridor with an IV bag in her hands, talking to one of the paramedics while the gurneys were staged for loading. Emily got to her in 8 steps. "Inside," Emily said. "Now! Everyone!" Priya looked at her face and didn't ask questions. She turned to the paramedic. "Load them through the internal corridor, not the entrance. Go." The paramedics moved. The gurneys went. A Fairhaven officer near the entrance looked at Emily with a question forming on his face. "Get away from the entrance frame," she said, "right now." He moved. She put herself against the interior wall, out of the sight line, and looked back through the damaged entrance at the parking lot. Harlan's team was moving. She could see them repositioning, using the vehicles as cover, one figure breaking left toward the tree line perimeter. Professional, fast. But the tree line was 80 meters in dense, and someone with a position already established in there had every advantage. The officer she'd moved was asking her something. She held up a hand, "Wait," and kept watching the parking lot. Nothing happened for 15 seconds. Then she heard it. Not a shot, something else. A car engine somewhere beyond the tree line, accelerating hard through what sounded like a gravel service road. Harlan's team heard it too. She could see them turning toward the sound, two of them sprinting for the vehicles. On her radio, she still had Darrow's radio clipped to her waistband, hadn't given it up yet. A burst of static. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Calm, male, accented at the edge of something Eastern European. "Staff Sergeant Emily Carter," the voice said. "Former 75th Ranger Regiment." She looked at the radio. "You did good work tonight," the voice said. "Better than his people deserved." She pressed the transmit. "Who is this?" A pause. Just long enough to be deliberate. "Someone who knows what your record says, and someone who knows that the people you helped put in handcuffs tonight are going to create a problem for an organization that doesn't tolerate problems." Another pause. "I'm not calling to threaten you, Sergeant. I'm calling because you're competent and I find competent people useful. I want to meet." She looked up. Harlan was in the entrance, had heard. He'd gotten close enough to catch it. She could see him already talking into his own radio. "Give me a location," she said into Darrow's radio. "I'll be in touch," the voice said. The frequency went dead. Harlan crossed to her in 4 steps. "Did you get anything from the audio?" Eastern European accent, possibly Russian adjacent. Educated, calm under pressure. She held out the radio. "He's been monitoring Wild's frequency. He knows my name, my unit, my rank." Harlan took the radio. His expression was the controlled version of worried, which on his face was almost indistinguishable from calm, except that she'd seen both and she knew the difference. "Emily," he said. "Don't," she said. I know what it just became." She looked at the parking lot, the tree line, the dark beyond the lights. Whatever tonight was, it's not over. She felt it then, the full weight of the last 2 hours landing on her body at once. Her shoulder, her head, her knee. The 41 minutes and everything that had come after. She pressed her back against the hospital wall and breathed through it. She'd spent 6 years building quiet. A regular life, a good job, a place that asked nothing from her past. She'd gotten pretty good at it. And in the span of one night, something had found her anyway. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. No area code she recognized. She stared at the screen for one long second. Then she answered it. The line was open for 3 seconds before anyone spoke. She could hear breathing, measured, unhurried, the same voice from the radio but closer now, filtered through a phone connection instead of a crackle of radio frequency. She kept her back against the hospital wall and her eyes on Harlan, who had already clocked the phone in her hand and was moving toward her with his own raised in a signal that meant, "Keep them talking." "You answered quickly," the voice said. "I was holding it," she said. "I know, I watched you." She didn't let that move her face. "Then you know the parking lot has about 30 law enforcement personnel in it right now." "I know exactly what's in that parking lot." A pause. "I also know that none of them can find me, which I think you've already deduced." She had. Harlan's team had gone to the tree line and come back empty. She'd watched them return 60 seconds ago. Whoever this was, he wasn't in the trees anymore. Or he'd never been there. The car engine had been a distraction or a vehicle he'd sent ahead on timer, and he'd watched them redirect to it. "What do you want?" she asked. "I told you. I want to meet." "You also told me the people Wild works for are going to become a problem for me, which means you're either offering help or you're delivering the warning in person before the problem arrives." A brief pause. Then something that might have been a quiet laugh, low and uncharacteristic enough that it caught her off guard. "You are exactly what Reeves described. I wasn't sure he was reliable." "He isn't," she said. "He gave up Wild in under a minute." "Yes. That's going to be a significant issue for several people." The voice shifted slightly. Still controlled, but with an edge now, something beneath the surface. My name is Vasil Merrick. I am what you would call a compliance officer for the network Wild operates within. I've been watching his crew for 2 months because his revenue numbers have been inconsistent. Tonight confirmed certain suspicions. Another pause. The organization I report to is not patient with operational failures. What happened inside that hospital will be attributed to poor leadership, poor vetting, poor everything. Wild will be blamed. His entire crew will be blamed. And then steps will be taken. Steps, she said, to prevent future complications. She looked at Harlan. He had a pad out and was writing Merak/compliance/network/steps. And he made a circular motion with his pen that meant keep going. Why call me? She asked. Because you are a complication that shouldn't exist. Merrick said it without malice, factual. A nurse who dismantled 6 professionals in 40 minutes. That doesn't fit any model. My organization is going to want to understand you, which means they're going to look at you, and when they look at you, they're going to find your service record, and then they're going to make a decision about what to do with that information. And you're warning me because I've spent 14 years in this world and I'm tired of it, he said. And because I have information that could end the network I work for completely, and I need someone who can deliver it to the right people in a way that results in actual consequences rather than a sealed file and a buried report. Emily looked at Harlan. His pen had stopped moving. You want to give us the organization, she said. I want to give your task force. Yes, I know about the task force. I've known for 6 months. Everything. Financials, structure, trafficking routes. Every collection point. The names of 11 individuals currently under no form of law enforcement scrutiny in exchange for a specific outcome. What outcome? Immunity, new identity. My daughter is 17. She doesn't know what I do. I want to finish that before she does. The parking lot was very quiet. Somewhere in the middle distance, a Fairhaven PD radio crackled and went silent. Harlan was looking at Emily with an expression she recognized from operations. That specific stillness when something shifts from tactical to significant. Where are you? She asked. Somewhere you won't find me until I choose to be found. A pause. I'll contact you again at 0600. Make sure the right people are listening. And Sergeant Carter, the name landed deliberately, a reminder. Sleep if you can. You've had a long night, and tomorrow is going to be longer. The line went dead. She lowered the phone. Harlan was already on his radio, pulling in his team lead, and she stood there for a moment with the phone in her hand and the night air cold on the back of her neck, and the weight of what had just happened settling over everything else that was already settled on her. Vasil Merrick. She needed to know who that was before 0600, which gave her, she checked the clock, 4 hours and 20 minutes. Jet. They set up in the hospital administrative conference room because it was the most intact room in the building with a table large enough to work on, and because Emily wasn't leaving the hospital until she knew her staff was going to be okay, and Harlan hadn't pushed on that point, which she noted and appreciated. The table had 3 laptops on it within 15 minutes. Harlan's task force, the 4 people from the helicopter plus 2 more who'd arrived in a separate vehicle she hadn't tracked, spread across the chairs, and she sat at the end with a bag of ice pressed to her temple that someone had put together from the ER supply without being asked. That someone was Priya, who had also brought coffee in a paper cup and set it next to Emily's elbow without saying anything about it. You should go home, Emily told her. The bus doesn't run until 5, Priya said, and I want to make sure Mrs. Albrecht's transfer goes through. Emily looked at her for a moment. She thought about saying something about what Priya had done tonight. Keeping her head, keeping people together, functioning under a level of stress that would have paralyzed most people with twice her years of experience. She didn't say it yet. She'd say it properly, when there was time. Instead, she turned back to the table. Harlan's analyst, a young woman named Cassidy, who worked fast and talked in clipped declarative sentences that Emily found immediately comprehensible, had pulled Merrick within 12 minutes of the name being given. Vasil Merrick, 47. Born Sarajevo. Naturalized U.S. citizen 2009, clean record on paper. Import-export consulting, 3 LLCs, 2 of which are dissolved. The third is active and has done business with 4 companies we already have flagged in the Wild investigation. Cassidy pulled up a photo. This him? Emily looked at the image. A man she'd never seen before. Middle-aged, sharp-featured, the kind of face that would read as ordinary in most contexts. I can't confirm visually. I never saw him. 14 months of surveillance, and he's never appeared on any physical surveillance, Harlan said. We have him on 2 phone intercepts, and that's it. If he's really willing to deliver the network... He stopped. We need to verify the call. Confirm it's actually Merrick and not someone using the name. He knew about the task force, Emily said. Not the existence of it. The structure. He knew it was a task force, not a standard federal investigation. That's specific knowledge. Which either means he has a source inside, Cassidy said, or he's been very close to someone who does. Nobody said the obvious thing that followed from that for a moment. Then Harlan said it. We have to assume the task force has been partially compromised, which means what Merrick told us about the organization coming after the loose ends, after Emily, we can't assume our communication channels are clean. Emily set the ice pack down on the table. Her head was pounding in a steady, dull rhythm. How long have you had the task force running? 14 months. And you've never been able to get close enough for an arrest-level case? Correct. Because someone was moving information ahead of you. Harlan didn't answer, which was its own answer. She looked at the table for a moment. All of it. The task force, the CI whose security had opened up on Wild's crew, the surveillance that had somehow never produced actionable intelligence, was taking on a different shape. She was building a picture from too few pieces, but the pieces she had were suggestive. The CI, she said. The one Wild was collecting from tonight. Where is he now? Protective custody, Harlan said. Meridian County facility. Is that facility in the task force's communication network? He was very still for a moment. Then he reached for his radio. The CI's name was a detail Harlan kept from her, citing active investigation protocols that she accepted without pushing. But what Harlan told her 40 minutes later, standing in the corridor outside the conference room, voice low, the rest of the team visible through the glass but out of earshot, was enough. He's gone, Harlan said. She looked at him. Not dead. Gone. Walked out. Facility logged a transfer order at 11:53 p.m. Legitimate paperwork, legitimate authorization codes. The order was routed through the task force's secure channel. He paused. Except nobody on the task force issued it. She processed that. Someone with access to the secure channel had manufactured a transfer order for the CI in the middle of the worst night the task force had ever had, while everyone's attention was on Redwood Memorial. While the CI, who had been listening to everything Reeves was saying and who knew exactly which names Reeves would give up under questioning, was in custody and accessible. He's been moved to wherever they want him, she said, or he walked out on his own because he was never actually a CI. Because he was the source that's been moving information to the network for 14 months. That landed in a way that changed the geometry of the whole night. She stood with it for a moment. Wild's collection from tonight, she said slowly. It went wrong when the CI's security opened fire. Yes. But if the CI was the network's inside man, if the shooting was staged, then the whole thing that sent Wild running to this hospital was deliberate. She looked at Harlan. Someone walked Wild into a situation that would expose his crew, burn his operation, and let the CI disappear in the chaos. The CI gives the network everything Wild's people might tell us, and then disappears clean while we're processing the arrests. Harlan's voice had gone to that particular quiet that she associated with controlled anger. We've been running a CI for 14 months who was burning us the entire time. To someone in the task force. He said nothing. Someone with authorization codes, she said. Still nothing, but she could see it in the set of his jaw. He'd already started the list. He was working through his own people and it was costing him something significant. I'm sorry, she said and meant it. Don't be. He looked away. This is what I came back to Fairhaven to untangle. I knew the task force was compromised. I didn't know how deep. Merrick calling you tonight. He stopped. He didn't call the task force. He called you. A nurse who happened to take apart a 6-man operation and has no connection to any of this until 3 hours ago. A number the network doesn't have. She saw it then. He's been trying to find a clean line out for a while, and tonight handed him one. Outside the conference room window, Cassidy was working fast, and Emily could see the shape of what she was building: financial threads, communication records, the 14 months of investigation that was about to either collapse or become something much larger, depending on what happened at 0600. She looked at the clock on the wall, 3 hours and 12 minutes. "I'm going to check on my staff," she said, "and then I'm going to sit with Cassidy and tell her everything Merrick said. Exact wording, exact pauses, anything that might help her narrow the source." "Emily," she stopped. "What I said about the network knowing your name." He said it carefully, the way he'd always said things he didn't want to say. "That's not going to go away after tonight. Even if Merrick delivers and we roll up the whole structure, there are people connected to this organization in other cities, other countries. Some of them are going to see the case file eventually." She looked at him. "So what are you telling me?" "I'm telling you that the quiet you built here, the life." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." She studied him for a moment. This man she'd thought was dead, who'd apparently spent 6 years doing the kind of work that required a funeral as cover, who'd walked across a parking lot and turned her contained life into something she was going to have to rebuild from unfamiliar materials. "We're going to have a conversation," she said. "After." "I know." "A real one." "Yes." She turned and walked toward the ER. The hospital had gone quiet in the way places go quiet after violent events. Not peaceful, not calm, but emptied. The tactical teams had cleared out. Most of the staff had been sent home. The physical damage was documented, the glass was swept into piles, and 2 maintenance workers in gray coveralls were boarding up the entrance frame with plywood that looked wrong against the hospital facade. Too improvised, too temporary. Priya was still there. She'd moved Mrs. Albrecht's paperwork through and was sitting at the nursing station with a cup of coffee, going cold beside her, writing her incident report in the methodical way she did everything, and she looked up when Emily came in. "Transfer confirmed," Priya said. "She's on her way to Meridian." "Good." Emily came to the station and leaned against the counter. "How are you doing?" Priya looked at her report. "I keep writing the same sentence over." A pause. "I got to a black vehicle entered through the main entrance at approximately, and I've started it 4 times. "That's normal." "Is it?" "You'll finish it," Emily said. "Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you can. There's no deadline for the sentence." Priya set the pen down. "The man you disarmed in the basement, he's 3 times your size. I had the advantage of him not expecting it. And the one on the 2nd floor. Same thing. And Kellor, who I saw, and he, Priya stopped. "You have a black eye forming, Emily. Your arm keeps dropping lower than the other one and you keep correcting it. You should be in the other building getting an x-ray." "Probably. And instead you're here." "I'm still the charge nurse," Emily said. Priya looked at her. Not challenging, not odd. Something more complicated than either. "Who were you before?" she asked. "I mean..." She shook her head. "Sorry, that's not..." "It's okay." Emily considered the question. "I was someone who was trained to handle situations most people aren't trained for. And then I stopped. And then tonight I needed to be that person again for about 41 minutes, and it..." She stopped. "It worked. But it's not something I felt good about. It's not something that feels like winning." Priya was quiet for a moment. "But everyone's alive," she said finally. "Yeah." Emily looked at the boarded entrance. "They are." The rest of the wait was paperwork and coffee, and Cassidy appearing at one point to work through the Merrick call in granular detail, extracting every word and inflection Emily could recall, and then disappearing again toward the conference room where the task force was building its 0600 framework. At 20 minutes past 5, Emily stepped outside through the side exit and stood in the cold morning air, the sky going from black to a gray that wasn't quite dawn yet, but was working toward it. Her shoulder ached in a deep structural way that told her she was going to need imaging. The bruise over her temple had done whatever bruises do overnight when you don't sleep. Her phone buzzed. "Harlan." Cassidy found the source in the task force. Civilian contractor, 7 months on. He's in federal custody as of 20 minutes ago. She read it twice. Then, Merrick called at 0542, gave us a location. He's coming in. She exhaled slowly. The gray in the sky brightened by another degree. From the side exit, she could see the east end of the parking lot, the police tape, the evidence markers on the asphalt where the SUV had come through. The SUV itself was gone, impounded. What was left was just a damaged building and the particular stillness of a place where something had happened and was now, incrementally, becoming history. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Not Merrick. Different configuration. She stared at it. It buzzed a second time before she answered. Carter. The voice was not Merrick, not Harlan, not anyone she'd spoken to tonight. It was a woman, older, flat-accented, the kind of voice that came from not having adjusted it to any room in a very long time. We've been watching Merrick for 3 years. He has information about our network that we cannot allow to be transferred to federal authorities. Emily held the phone very steady. We know he called you. We know about the 0600 meeting. A pause. We also know about a task force contractor who was arrested 20 minutes ago. The decision has consequences for a number of ongoing operations and the people responsible for that arrest. Another pause. We are not calling to threaten you, Sergeant. We have done our research. People with your particular background tend to respond better to clarity than to threats. Then be clear, Emily said. Merrick will not reach the 0600 meeting. She turned and started moving back toward the hospital door. And you will not reach it either, the voice said. Not safely. Not without our agreement. She pushed through the door, hit the corridor fast, was already scanning as she moved. What do you want? A conversation, the voice said. In person, before Merrick speaks to anyone. That's not going to happen. Sergeant Carter. The woman's voice didn't change. No urgency, no heat, just that flat, certain quality. We have 3 people in your building right now. They came in through the maintenance access 2 hours ago while law enforcement was focused on the parking lot. They are not there to hurt your staff. A pause. They are there to make sure you take this call seriously. Emily stopped moving. The corridor was empty. She looked left, looked right. Maintenance access. She knew where that was. East side, below the boiler room, used by the overnight maintenance crew and rarely monitored because the camera had been on a work order for 6 weeks and hadn't been fixed yet. She'd reported that camera herself. You did your research, she said. Yes. She looked at the Glock she'd relinquished 2 hours ago to Harlan's team. She was unarmed in a hospital that might have 3 more people in it. How long have I got? She asked. Until 0600, the woman said. After that, decisions get made. By other people. That's not what I want. A pause. I'm not your enemy, Sergeant. I'm a person trying to prevent a situation that serves nobody well from escalating further. Then call your people off. Come talk to me first. Give me something to come to, Emily said. A face, a name, something real. Silence. 5 seconds of it, which was a long time on a phone when someone was deciding something. Then, my name is Lena Voss. I've been running the Western U.S. distribution arm of this network for 9 years. I built it. I'm also the one who's been quietly cooperating with the DOJ office in Seattle for the past 8 months, which your task force, your compromised task force, has no record of. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Before Merrick gives your task force his version of this network, Lena Voss said, I need you to understand that there is another version, and the 2 versions are not the same, and the differences matter enormously to what happens next. The corridor outside was still empty. Somewhere in the building, she had no idea where, 3 people were waiting. Or weren't. She couldn't verify it, and she had no weapon, and she was operating on no sleep with a shoulder that wasn't right, and a head that had been hit too many times in the last 4 hours. And the clock on the wall read 5:41, 19 minutes to 0600. She took a breath. Tell me where you are, she said. The roof, Lena Voss said. Access door is unlocked. Come alone. Emily looked at the phone for half a second after the line dropped. 19 minutes. 3 people possibly in the building, possibly not. She had no way to verify and no weapon and no backup who knew what she was walking into. Because telling Harlan meant telling the task force channel, and Voss had just told her the task force had been leaking for months. She didn't go to the roof. She went to Harlan directly, walked fast back through the corridor, pushed through the conference room door, and said quietly, "I need 30 seconds, and I need you to not use the radio." He read her face and stood up immediately. They stepped into the corridor. She told him in 45 seconds. Lena Voss, the name, the DOJ, Seattle claim, the 3 people in the building, the roof. She watched him process it the way she'd watched him process things for years, quickly, without visible reaction, building the operational picture before he spoke. "The Seattle DOJ office," he said. "I know that AUSA running Western U.S. organized crime cases. If Voss has been talking to them for 8 months without our task force knowing, then she either has a separate deal in progress or she's running you," Emily said. "One of those I can work with. You need to call Seattle directly, not through the task force channel, and the 3 people in the building. If they're real, they came in through the east maintenance access. Camera's been down for 6 weeks. She held his eyes. "Search it, but quiet. Don't announce it on any channel that's been compromised." He was already moving. He stopped, turned back. "You're not going to the roof alone." "I'm going to the roof," she said. "You're going to be close enough to respond if it goes wrong. That's different from alone." He started to say something. "Dex." She said it the way she used to say it on operations when the arguing was done and the execution was what mattered. "I've got 17 minutes. He closed his mouth, nodded once. She went to the stairwell. Buzz. The roof access door opened onto a flat expanse of HVAC units, exhaust vents, and drainage channels, the whole thing faintly lit by the gray pre-dawn that had settled over Fairhaven like something that hadn't decided yet whether to become morning. The air was cold and wet and smelled like metal and fir trees from the tree line she could see beyond the hospital's east perimeter. She went through the door low and fast and put her back against the nearest HVAC unit before she'd fully assessed the space. Old habit. She couldn't stop it even without a weapon in her hands. Lena Voss was standing near the roof's western edge, 20 feet out, facing away from her, looking at the parking lot below. She was shorter than Emily had imagined from the voice. Compact, mid-50s, silver hair pulled back, wearing a dark coat that was too good for a maintenance access entry. She hadn't heard Emily come through the door, or she'd heard and had decided not to react to it, which was different. Emily came out from behind the HVAC unit. "You said come alone." Voss turned around. Her face was angular, composed, the kind of face that had learned to be very still in rooms where stillness was the only safe option. "You told someone," she said. "Not an accusation, observation." "Yes." "Smart." She looked Emily over with a directness that wasn't rude, just efficient. "You're hurt." "Been a long night." "Sit down." "I'll stand." Voss almost smiled. "Of course you will." She turned back to the parking lot for a moment, then faced Emily fully. "I'll be direct. I have 8 months of cooperation with the Seattle DOJ, case number I will provide. AUSA. Renata Gould is the contact. I've delivered financial infrastructure, 4 key operatives, 2 trafficking routes. The deal covers me and 2 members of my operation who assisted in building the case. It does not cover Merrick. Why not? Because Merrick built the collection network, the protection rackets, the enforcement structure, the violence that kept it running. She said it without flinching, which told Emily she'd made her peace with her own complicity some time ago and moved past it into something more operational. I ran distribution. I told myself that was a meaningful distinction for about 7 years, and then I stopped lying to myself. But Merrick is different. He ran the side of this that hurt people directly and repeatedly, and I'm not willing to let him walk out with a clean deal while the people he actually harmed get nothing. Emily looked at her. "You called me to stop him from talking to my task force." "I called you to make sure that when he talks to your task force, the right people are listening, not a compromised channel. Not someone who'll bury his cooperation and move him somewhere quiet in exchange for continued information access." She paused. "The contractor your team arrested tonight, Devereaux, he's been feeding operational details to the network for 7 months. But he wasn't the only one." "That was new?" Emily held very still. "Who else?" "The CI who walked out of protective custody tonight. His name is Tomas Reedy, and he has been working both sides of this investigation since the beginning. He's not just a network informant. He's been actively shaping what your task force knew and didn't know, which cases got traction, which ones got quietly walked back. Voss reached into her coat pocket and produced a folded document, paper, not digital, which Emily noted, and held it out. Financial records. Payments from a shell company connected to the network to an account registered under a name that connects to Reedy. 8 months of transactions. Seattle already has copies. Emily crossed the space between them and took the document. She didn't unfold it. "Why give this to me?" she asked. "You have a DOJ contact." "Because Gould's office doesn't have jurisdiction over what happened in this building tonight." Voss looked at her steadily. "You do. You were here. You're the witness to everything Wild's crew did, and you're the person Merrick chose to call, and you're the reason this network is exposed right now instead of 6 months from now, when Merrick would have burned 2 or 3 more people and then quietly disappeared." A pause. "I've been watching what happens to people who do what you did tonight and then get handed to institutions with compromised channels. They end up managed, sidelined. The thing they uncovered gets filed somewhere, and the people who should answer for it don't." Emily held the paper. "I'm not going to let that happen," she said. "I know." Voss said it simply. "That's why I called you." Below them, the parking lot was starting to shift. She could see movement, vehicles, the first gray light catching the evidence tape. She heard a door open somewhere in the stairwell below, the sound traveling up through the metal structure of the roof access. Harlan's team moving quietly. "3 people in the building," Emily said. "Were they real?" Voss looked at her. "I needed you to take the call seriously." "So no. No." Emily absorbed that, the manipulation of it, the calculation, and underneath that, the thing that Voss had correctly identified, that Emily wouldn't have come up here without a reason to believe it was urgent. She didn't like being played. She also understood why it had been necessary, and she was too tired to be angry about it right now. "A USA Gould," she said. "I'm going to call that number and confirm the case." "Use this." Voss reached into her other pocket and held out a phone. Burner, prepaid, nothing that had touched the task force network. "Number's already in there. She'll answer. It's early, but she answers early." Emily took the phone. Voss looked at the brightening sky over Fairhaven. "I have a daughter," she said. "She's 23. She thinks I work in import logistics." A pause. "I've been lying to her for 9 years. The cooperation deal. It's not just about getting out. It's about being someone she can know." She stopped. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that some people on the wrong side of these cases aren't abstractions. We're just people who made a series of choices and then kept making them because stopping felt impossible." Emily looked at her. "I understand that," she said. "It doesn't change what you're going to have to answer for." "I know. But it changes how I'm going to talk to the people downstairs." Voss nodded. "Once." "Stay here," Emily said. "I'm going to make a call." USA. Renata Gould answered on the second ring, which at 5:48 in the morning said something about her relationship with sleep. Emily gave her name, her rank, the case number Voss had given her, and 30 seconds of context. Gould asked 2 sharp questions, got 2 precise answers, and then said, "I'll be in Fairhaven by 10. Don't let anyone move Voss until I get there." Emily went back to the roof door and signaled Harlan. He came up 2 minutes later with 2 of his team, and she watched him look at Voss with the particular expression of someone reconfiguring several months of assumptions in real time. He handled it without visibly falling apart, which she respected. She handed him the paper. "Reedy," she said. "Tomas Reedy. He walked out of protective custody tonight using a manufactured transfer order, but he had an exit arranged before that. Look at the account number on page 2. Harlan looked at the page. His jaw tightened. "The contractor Devereaux wasn't the end of it," she said. "He was the visible layer. Reedy is older and deeper, and your task force has been building its case on intelligence he shaped from inside. Then the 14 months isn't worthless. It just needs to be rebuilt around what was real versus what he fed you." She looked at him steadily. "Which means you know which cases got traction and which ones got quietly dropped. Work backward from the ones that went nowhere." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the document. "You got all of this from a 20-minute roof conversation." She'd been building up to it for 8 months, Emily said. She just needed someone she thought wouldn't bury it. And she picked you. I didn't have a channel to compromise. He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he used to look at her in the field when something she'd done had changed the shape of the problem. And she held it for a moment before looking away, because they still had that conversation to have, and this wasn't it. What do you need? He asked. Merrick's 0600 meeting goes ahead, she said. Clean channel, Gould's office looped in directly. Everything he gives you gets cross-referenced against what Voss has already provided to Seattle. Anything that conflicts gets documented. She paused. And someone needs to find Tomas Reedy before he reaches anyone connected to the network. Already running, he said. And my staff. She said it last, not because it mattered least, but because it was the thing she'd been holding back until the operational picture was clear. Priya Vasanthan, Dr. Fenn, Dr. Nkosi, Marcus Webb, everyone who was in that building tonight, they give their statements to Dolan's office, not the task force. The task force channel is still not clean until Reedy is in custody. Agreed. She handed him the burner phone. Gould's number. She's expecting your call. He took it, turned toward his team, stopped, and looked back at her once more. Emily, he said. I know, she said. Go. Tomas Reedy was found at 6:42 a.m. in a motel 12 miles outside Fairhaven, in a room registered under a name connected to one of the network's dissolved LLCs. The connection so thin it should have been missed, and would have been missed by anyone who hadn't been awake for 18 hours reconstructing the infrastructure of a criminal network from first principles. Cassidy found it. She was 29 years old and had gone to sleep for 40 minutes sometime around 2 a.m., and that was apparently enough for her, because by 6:30 she was running connection matrices that the compromised task force channel had never produced in 14 months. Reedy didn't fight. The Fairhaven PD officers who took him into custody reported that he was sitting on the edge of the motel bed when they came through the door, dressed, bag packed, as if he'd been waiting for the knock and had simply miscalculated when it would come. He asked for a lawyer and said nothing after that, which was the smartest thing he'd done in months, and also the last piece of control he got to exercise. The federal charges came down by 8 a.m. Marak's cooperation debriefing, conducted in a conference room at the Fairhaven field office with AUSA. Gould on a secure video link and a clean recording setup that had been physically verified by Cassidy, produced 4 hours of testimony covering the network's operational structure, 11 individuals not previously under investigation, 3 financial hubs across 2 states, and a trafficking route that connected Fairhaven's collection network to operations in 2 other Pacific Northwest cities. Merrick was methodical and detailed in the way of someone who had been preparing the testimony in his head for a long time and was relieved to finally say it out loud. Garrett Wild, from his hospital bed at Meridian General, where his man Petrov was 3 hours out of surgery, gave a full statement to federal investigators. His attorney was present and had clearly advised him that cooperation was the only play. He named the network's middle tier in full: 6 individuals, 4 locations, enough to collapse the collection arm completely. The attorney tried twice to negotiate a sentence reduction and was told that the terms would be assessed after full disclosure. By noon, 7 federal arrest warrants had been issued. By 2 p.m., 5 of the 7 individuals were in custody. The other 2 were located by the following morning. The Fairhaven Register ran the story at 4 p.m. when the U.S. Attorney's Office released a statement confirming the arrests and the investigation. The headline said, "Federal Operation Dismantles Regional Criminal Network Following Hospital Siege." The article described the events at Redwood Memorial in 3 paragraphs that were factually accurate but missed almost everything that had actually happened, which Emily read standing at the nursing station on her first shift back 4 days later and felt nothing particular about. She was used to the real version of things, not making it into the public version. What did make it into the public version, 10 days after the siege, was an official statement from the Department of Justice's Western District Office, co-signed by AUSA Gould and the U.S. Attorney, describing the actions of an unnamed hospital employee who had, the language was careful, institutional, stripped of everything that made it real, demonstrated exceptional courage and tactical discipline in securing the safety of hospital staff and patients during an armed criminal incursion, preventing what federal investigators assess would have been multiple casualties. The statement confirmed that the employee's actions had directly enabled the federal investigation that followed. It didn't name her. She'd asked them not to. Priya came to find her on the afternoon of the 11th day, when Emily was finishing a chart at the nursing station and the ER was running a normal, chaotic Thursday in the way that felt now like an enormous gift. Minor injuries, a pediatric fever, 2 chest pains that turned out to be anxiety and acid reflux respectively, 1 broken wrist from a skateboarding incident involving a 14-year-old who kept insisting he'd had it under control. "Doctor, Nkosi wants you in the conference room," Priya said. "When you have a minute." "What for?" "She didn't say. But she's been in there for 20 minutes with Captain Harlan and a woman I don't recognize who has the kind of posture that makes me think she's either military or a dancer." Emily set the chart down. The conference room, the same one where Harlan's task force had spread their laptops across the table 11 days ago, had been cleaned and returned to its standard hospital function, which meant a projector and a whiteboard with a care pathway diagram someone had started and abandoned. Harlan was there, and Dr. Nkosi, and the woman with the posture who turned out to be a deputy U.S. Marshal named Cortez, who shook Emily's hand with the grip of someone who'd decided how hard to grip it in advance. There was also a man in civilian clothes whom Emily didn't recognize until he stood up, and then she recognized him because she'd seen his face in task force briefings. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon, whose name was Brandt, who looked younger in person than in photographs. She looked at Harlan. He gave her nothing, which meant he'd been told to give her nothing, which meant this was going to be a thing she hadn't prepared for. Brandt spoke first. "Sergeant Carter." "Ms. Carter," she said. "I've been out for 6 years." He accepted that without blinking. "Ms. Carter, I'll keep this brief because I understand you have a shift." He looked at her steadily. "What you did in this hospital 11 days ago is not something we can fully quantify in a press statement. The internal assessment, the one that doesn't get released, describes it as the single most consequential individual action in the investigation. Not because of the tactical elements, though those were," he paused, "remarkable, but because without the events of that night, Merrick doesn't surface, Voss doesn't surface, and Reedy goes on building what he was building inside a compromised task force for another year or two. The network we've been trying to reach for 14 months gets rolled up in 3 weeks because of what happened in your building on a Thursday night." Emily waited. "The DOJ, in coordination with the U.S. Marshals and the task force, would like to offer you a formal role as a civilian tactical consultant for the region's organized crime division," he said. "Part-time. It can be structured around your position here. It would involve case review, tactical assessment, and periodic training. It is not a return to active duty. You would not carry a weapon as part of the role." He paused. "Unless you wanted to." Nkosi was watching her from across the table with the expression of someone who had agreed to host this meeting and was now privately very interested in what happened next. Emily looked at Brandt, at Harlan, who was still giving her nothing, at Marshal Cortez, who dealt her hand and was now just watching. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Brandt said. "How long do I have?" "We'd want an answer by the end of the month." "You'll have it." She looked around the room once more. "Is that it?" "One more thing." He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a single page across the table. "This is the internal citation. It won't be published, but it's part of the official record." She picked it up. The language was formal, government document dense, the kind of prose that had been written by committee and reviewed by lawyers, and still somehow managed to say the thing underneath all the careful wording. She read it once through. She read it again. She set it back on the table. She didn't trust herself to say anything for a moment, so she didn't say anything, and no one in the room pushed her, which was the correct call. "Thank you," she said finally. She shook Brandt's hand. She shook Cortez's hand. She looked at Harlan. "Coffee," she said. "When you have time." "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," she agreed. She went back to the ER. The 14-year-old with the broken wrist was being discharged, his mother holding the cast instructions and looking at him with the expression of someone who had been frightened and was now converting the fear into a lecture that would last the entire drive home. He was already composing the face he was going to use to receive it. Emily signed the discharge paperwork. Priya appeared at her shoulder. How'd it go? Fine. That's not an answer. They offered me a consulting role. Emily handed back the chart. Civilian. Part-time. Priya was quiet for a moment. Are you going to take it? I don't know yet. What are you thinking? She thought about that. She thought about what Lena Voss had said on the roof, about the series of choices that become a direction before you've noticed. She thought about Priya holding a crying woman's arm in the first 60 seconds of a siege and making exactly the right call. She thought about Doctor Fenn, who'd been back on shift 3 days after the siege and who'd told Emily in the break room that she'd been unable to sleep for 2 nights and then had slept 12 hours straight and woken up angry in a way she couldn't explain. Emily had told her the anger was normal and useful, and she should let it run its course rather than trying to manage it. And Fenn had looked at her like that was the most useful thing anyone had said to her in a week. She thought about Marcus Webb, who'd done exactly what she'd asked him to do in the basement and hadn't flinched once, and who'd come to her office on day 3 to ask, matter-of-factly, whether there was anything else she needed from him, and when she'd told him no, had nodded once and gone back to his desk. She thought about 41 minutes on a Thursday night, and everything that had come from them, and the life she'd built in Fairhaven that was still here, still intact, still genuinely hers, just bigger now than she'd been keeping it. I'm thinking, she said to Priya, that I've been a nurse for 5 years and I haven't gotten worse at it. You haven't, Priya said. You've gotten better. And I spent 6 years before that doing something else, and I haven't lost that either, which I thought I had. Or wanted to think I had. She straightened the chart rack. So maybe the answer isn't choosing between them. Priya considered this. That's almost profound. Almost, Emily agreed. The radio on the desk crackled. An incoming transfer from a MVA on Route 9. 2 patients, 1 critical, ETA 11 minutes. Emily was already moving before the transmission finished, pulling gloves, calling the trauma team, the ER, shifting into the particular organized urgency that she had never, in 5 years, found anything less than completely clarifying. Bay 2, she called to Priya. Get in cozy and get the blood. On it. She was at the trauma bay door when she stopped for 1 second, which was all she had, and let herself feel the weight of the last 11 days. Not the operational weight, not the tactical assessment, but the human weight of it. The fear she'd held down for 41 minutes and hadn't let surface until she was in her car, alone, in the hospital parking lot at 9 in the morning after it was over, where she'd sat for 20 minutes with her hands in her lap before she'd driven home. The bruises that were now a fading yellow-green, the shoulder that had needed 2 weeks of physical therapy and wasn't done yet. The conversation with Harlan, 2 days after, in a diner on Clement Street, that had lasted 3 hours and had answered some things and not answered others, and had ended not with resolution, but with the understanding that some things didn't resolve, they just became part of the structure you built on top of them. She let herself feel all of it for exactly 1 second. Then she put it down. The trauma bay door opened. The team was ready. She walked in, and she was the charge nurse of Redwood Memorial Hospital, 31 years old, present, focused, here, exactly where she'd chosen to be, which was a different thing from where she'd ended up. And the difference mattered more than she'd understood before that Thursday night, when a vehicle had come through her front door and she'd set down a clipboard and decided to handle it. The ambulance bay doors opened. The first gurney came through fast. Emily moved to meet it. Garrett Wild pled guilty to federal extortion and conspiracy charges 14 weeks after the siege. He received a 12-year sentence, reduced from 22 based on cooperation. The reduction was contested by 3 separate victim advocacy groups and was reported in the Fairhaven Register and the Oregon Tribune. His attorney issued a statement that no one read. Vasil Marak received a cooperation agreement that carried a sentence of 7 years, with eligibility for reduced custody conditions contingent on continued assistance. He was relocated under a modified identity program. His daughter was told by him, in a room with a federal victims advocate present, a version of the truth that took 4 hours and left both of them shattered, and eventually still in contact. The federal report noted this as an ancillary outcome. Thomas Reedy was charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and witness tampering, His trial was scheduled for the following year. He made no public statement and cooperated with nothing. Lena Voss entered federal custody under the terms of the agreement she'd built over 8 months with AUSA Gould. She served 4 years of a 6-year sentence, the reduction contingent on the completeness of her cooperation, which was assessed as total. Her daughter attended the sentencing. She was in the gallery. She did not leave. The task force contractor, Devereaux, received the longest sentence of anyone in the case, 17 years, because the federal judge took a specific and documented view of what it meant to corrupt an investigation from inside. The sentencing statement was 11 pages and used the word betrayal 4 times, which was unusual for federal judicial language and was noted in the legal press. Captain Dex Harlan remained with the task force, now rebuilt under a new communication structure that Cassidy had designed from scratch. He and Emily had coffee twice more before Christmas. The third conversation, the real one, the one that covered 6 years and a funeral and everything that had been left in the gap between them, happened on a Saturday in January at her kitchen table where they sat for 4 hours and she cried once, briefly, and he didn't try to fix it, which was the right thing to do, and they came out the other side of it into something that wasn't what they'd been before but was real and functional and honest, which was better than what they'd been before. Priya Vasanthan was nominated for a Hospital Excellence Award in the spring for actions during the incident and for the quality of her patient care in the months following. She accepted it at the department meeting, said 3 sentences, and went back to work. Emily told her afterward that the 3 sentences were exactly right. Marcus Webb had a new camera installed over the east maintenance access within 2 weeks of the incident. He submitted the work order himself. He also, without being asked, began doing a walkthrough of the hospital's access points every night at the start of his shift, logging anything that needed attention. He'd been doing this for years, he said, but now he did it with documentation. The citation, the internal one, the one that wasn't published, was framed and hung in the administrative office of the Department of the Army's Special Operations Medical Records Division, added to a file that Emily Carter had left behind when she walked out of the service 6 years before. She didn't know it was there. She wouldn't have asked for it to be. But it was, and it said, in the careful language of official record, the kind that strips everything personal out and leaves only the essential facts, that a person had been trained and had kept that training and had used it at the moment it was needed, and that the people who were alive because of it were alive, and that mattered in a way that required no additional language. The ER at Redwood Memorial ran, on a normal Thursday, at about 70% capacity. On a busy Thursday, the kind with flu season overlap and a sporting event, and the particular phase of the moon that every ER nurse knows produces a spike in the inexplicable, it ran at 95, with the kind of barely controlled forward motion that required everyone present to be doing exactly their job without wasted movement. Emily Carter was good at her job. She had been good at it before, and she was better at it now, in the way that people get better at things they've chosen deliberately after being tested on whether they actually want them. She was still imperfect at it. She had the direct communication style that some patients found abrupt and some found reassuring. She missed things when she was tired. She sometimes assumed people were more resilient than they were and had to recalibrate. But she was present in it in a way that was visible to the people who worked with her. She had taken the consulting role, part-time, civilian, structured around her shifts. Her first assessment had been submitted on a Wednesday and had identified 2 procedural gaps in a case the Organized Crime Division had been trying to crack open, and the lead investigator had apparently stared at it for a long time before emailing Harlan to ask who she was. She was Emily Carter. She had been a soldier and she was a nurse, and she had, one Thursday night in a small city in Oregon, been both at the same time, and the thing that had surprised her most, not the competence, not the outcome, but the thing she kept coming back to, was that it hadn't felt like 2 different people. It had felt like one person, finally, being all of herself at once. She didn't have a clean lesson from that. She didn't have a tidy formulation. What she had was this. The things people bury don't disappear. They go quiet, and they wait. And when you need them, they're there. And the question isn't whether to have lived a life that made you capable. The question is what you do with that capability when the moment comes. Whether you use it to protect or you don't. She had used it. She was going to keep using it. In the ER, the second gurney from the Route 9 MVA came through the doors, and Priya called out vitals, and Emily moved to position, gloved hands ready, and the work was immediate and demanding and real. There was no space in it for anything that wasn't the moment, which was the thing she'd always loved about it. Not the emergency, but the clarity. The requirement to be present that didn't leave room for anything else. The patient on the gurney was a man in his 40s who was scared and in pain and kept saying, "I'm okay. I'm okay," in the flat, insistent way of people who are not okay and know it and don't want it to be true. "I've got you," Emily said. He looked at her, took one look at her face. Whatever was in it, the steadiness, the presence, the complete and utter conviction that she was not going